Hello and welcome to Ancient Surprise. This is a series of videos where we go over all of the teams in WIXOSS Diva format at a high level. If you're changing teams, if you're new to the game, you're trying to figure out which team is right for you, then this is the series to look for. Ancient Surprise has a bit of a unique distinction among the teams in Diva format just because Umar and Tawil, two of the Elrigs of the three, actually existed as Elrigs in previous versions of the WIXOSS formats. If you're not familiar, WIXOSS is actually quite a long enduring game. It came out many years ago in Japan and had two different formats um, in Japanese only cards. Umar and Ta will actually show up as Elrigs in those formats. So if you are a fan of some of the older games, or if you've been around, or if you have some kind of connection to that, maybe through the anime, although they don't show up in the anime, this might be a team that interests you. So how do they all play? That's a bit of a tricky question just because the deck will play quite a bit differently depending on who you choose as your center. Umar is the blue center, and she tends to focus more on lane control, a lot of freezing effects, potentially swapping lanes, that kind of thing. So she's very focused on what's happening on the board. At is the green center, and she focuses more on extremely high power values, trying to pump up your Signy, boost up their power to really high levels, and then potentially even swinging in with Lancer type effects to kind of gain extra benefit from those high power levels and just go from there. Towel, as the red center, tends to focus a lot specifically on trying to basically go with mono red type strategies. She seems to go really well if you focus your entire deck mostly on just having red Signy and trying to leverage bonus effects by having all of your Signy basically be red. We will start, as we always do, with the team piece. Harmonic Call is a massive 8 cost to play. It's by far the most expensive piece we have. If you look at the top 8 cards of your deck, you get to put one level 1, one level 2, and one level 3 Signy from among them onto your field. Then your target 1 Signy gains Assassin, the level 2 gets Double Crush, and the level 3 gets Lancer. So this is a little bit of card filtering and selection. It is card draw, absolutely, because you're getting potentially 3 cards from the top of your deck. You're also granting them 3 extremely relevant and powerful abilities. I mean, Assassin wins games, Double Crush is an extra acceleration, Lancer will allow you to swing over whatever. So basically, the game plan for the most part will be to try to accumulate as much enter as possible, allow yourself the ability to use the Harmonic Call and attempt to kind of blow out your opponent at that point. So it allows you to basically exhaust all of your card resources earlier in the game if you need to. Try to build up your enter reserves, and then on your next turn, if you have no cards in hand, it doesn't matter because you can Harmonic Call and fill your board up theoretically that way and just kind of use that as a way to kind of swing in for lethal. So it's very powerful, but it is extremely costly. So there is some give and take between the two of these to try to get the most out of it. It's not the easiest to use, but if you are able to get it off, it can single-handedly win you games just because of how impactful it is. So let's take a look at the centers here. We're going to go in a little bit of a different order. As with the Sandbaka, all 3 of the current centers came out in the same set, so there's not a set release order. I'm going to go in lore thematic order. Another thing that you may not be aware of is that Umar at Towel is actually a reference to a Lovecraftian character who's actually named is Umar at Towel. I won't go into any details on that. You can feel free to do some research, but it is kind of interesting that there is some outside references to what these characters come from. So starting with Umar, she has a once per turn ability to move target Signy on your field to a different zone. So as I mentioned before, she likes to kind of rearrange the Signys, and there's a lot of Signy you can use that actually gain benefits when they change zones. So obviously those are no-brainers with that. Her enter effect is to erase one of your opponent's Signy zones until end of turn. This is probably the single most effective removal option in the game right now, just because not only does it remove the Signy when the zone is erased, it actually trashes it as opposed to enter charging it. So not only are you denying your opponent enter in that way, in addition to removing the Signy, it doesn't matter what attributes the Signy has. If it has shadow or anything like that, it doesn't matter because the zone is erased. There's nothing you can do about it. Additionally, if there are potential life burst effects that will trigger that could put a Signy into play, like an ambush type effect that maybe you flip a card and you can put a Signy, from the top of your deck into play, that kind of thing. That Signy zone still does not exist while you're attacking, so it is not applicable to actually have a Signy put into it. So Basically, it means that no matter what, you will get at least one Signy through in damage on the turn she grows to level 3, in addition to denying the resource and that sort of thing. So it's actually very efficient removal, very strong. Her once per turn action kind of wants a deck to be built more around it just to try to get more advantage out of it. It's not necessarily very impactful overall. She's just a decent center with her enter effect, obviously, is the single biggest upside to using her. Moving on, we have At. She has a once per turn ability. Target 3 Signy on your field with different classes get plus 3,000 power until end of turn. So as I mentioned before, having ability to boost your Signy's power to potentially make them big and give them Lancer, and maybe those Signy will have other effects that because they want themselves to be big, that kind of thing. This sort of goes along with it. It also implicitly wants you to have Signy that have different classes, which is an added deck building complexity that you kind of want to build your deck in such a way to have as few overlapping classes as possible to make the most out of this. It is worth noting that you do have to have 3 specifically different Signy classes in order to trigger this. If you share a class, then you cannot use this once per turn ability. It's just 3,000 power, so it's not the end of the world, but if you are counting on it to hit any thresholds, you do have to keep that in mind. She does have an enter effect as well to enter charge 2. If the cards that entered this way don't share a class, then you get to do it again. Basically a way to have, I mean, this will always pay for itself no matter what. You can potentially get an extra enter out of it, which you can then use for your harmonic call, as we mentioned previously. That's sort of a huge enter sync, and honestly, it's one of the biggest game breaking effects in the game right now. It's one of the reasons why Ancient Surprise is even remotely competitive, just because I feel like harmonic call is such a good piece. It really catapults them. So the ability to use that more efficiently is another reason why I think Ad is a really good center. Finally, we have Towel. Her once per turn action is to discard 2 red cards from your hand to draw 2 cards. This is just generally a good ability. Any kind of card filtering you can do in this game is really good. It gives you more options. It lets you dig for servants. It lets you have, potentially find removal. Basically, whatever you need. If you need the filtering for it, it's just good to have. Again, as I mentioned before, she focuses specifically on mono red or at least heavily skewed red type builds. So it only works if you actually have 2 red cards to discard. So that's a thing to keep in mind. Her int effect is look at the top 3, reveal any number of red cards from among them and add them to your hand, and then the rest go on the bottom. This kind of fuels her once per turn. And also, again, going along with the same mono red game plan, if you reveal the top 3 cards and they're all red, it's just an enter draw 3, which is pretty good, especially on a red Elrig. You don't really see that kind of thing very often. So she's a very specific, very narrow game plan, but she's very effective at doing so. Looking at assists going in reverse order as we usually do. Towel Screech is my personal level 1 of choice. Her enter effect is to vanish target Signy on your opponent's field with power 8,000 or less, and then you draw a card and discard a card. So considering that a lot of level 1 grow effects that will vanish a Signy are very similar to this, and that they're 0 to grow, and they basically open a lane for you, this is just all added upside. The ability that you can do some card filtering, draw a card and discard a card. The fact that you draw a card first and then get a discard is also really good because it's basically just if your hand is already really good, you can just draw and discard whatever you get. There's not any real penalty for doing so. This is a very good level 1 assist. It's one of the reasons why I think Towel is more better used as an assist as opposed to a center, just because her assists tend to be pretty good. My level 2 that I like to use is a little bit different. It does not have attack phase timing, which is kind of a problem for most level 2s, but the only reason I like this Towel Rainbow is because it is so value efficient. It's 1 to grow, so relatively cheap. Her enter effect is if you have a red Signy, you get to vanish a Signy with power 10k or less. If you have a blue Signy on your field, you get to draw 2. If you have a green, you get to enter charge 2. So if you have the full rainbow of red, blue, and green, you get a vanish, you get to draw 2, and you get to enter charge 2, which actually will net you 1 enter because it costs 1 to grow. So you'll basically be +1 on that. So a lot of really good things. I think it overrides the fact that it is only main phase timing. If it was attack phase timing, it would probably cost, I would imagine, 4 or 5, something like that. It is very efficiently costed. If you can build your board in such a way to get the maximum value out of it, that would be very good. Also of note is that you can use dual color Signy to kind of fill both of those roles. If you have a red Signy and then like a dual color blue-green, that actually counts as all 3 of them. So you can potentially do this with just 2 Signy on your field, or if you need to, share a color somewhere else, you can. I just really like this Elrig, even though it's not great for defensive options. It's great for keeping all of your resources, both enter and cards in hand, in addition to clearing a lane. I think it's just a very good general use card. Next up, we have At. The only level 1 that's really worth using right now is Charge, which is just a simple enter charge 2. I know that's like the vanilla green is just the ability to enter charge 2, but her other assist is not really worth mentioning. Her level 2 is also not necessarily very good. It's 2 to grow. It does have attack phase timing, so that's good. The enter effect is the next time you would take damage, instead you don't, so it just saves you from a damage, but it doesn't necessarily clear a lane. She also has a second enter ability to put 3 Signy with different classes from your enter zone into their owner's trash to vanish a Signy with power 10k or more. So basically what that means is you're kind of paying 3. It's basically an additional cost of 3 enter, except they have to be 3 specific Signy that do not share a class. And then you get a vanish effect with power 10k or more. So basically a level 3 opposing Signy. So it's okay. It's a little overcosted because not only do you have to pay the 3 enter, you have to pay the 2 to grow. So you have to pay like 5 minimum enter to actually get any kind of vanishing effect. You have to make sure you have the Signy in your enter zone to allow for that. And even so, it's only 10k or more. So it's basically only just a level 3, and or maybe they have something that's boosted or that kind of thing. Somewhat inefficiently costed. I'm not a huge fan of it. I feel like At's assists are another reason why the At center is so popular, just because her assists are really not very good. So you don't necessarily miss the opportunity cost of not having those just by having At in your center. And then, of course, we have Umer at the end here. She does have the standard blue draw 2 cards, so that is worth noting. That's typically a very good assist Elric to have. I'm highlighting Umer Freeze here just as an option because if you don't necessarily care about the drawing effects, or if you want to do something alternate with her, you can potentially use Umer Freeze to freeze 2 Signy in your opponent's field and force them to discard a card. So more board control, that kind of thing. The freeze tends to be more in lists that are more mono blue skewed, especially if they're Dream Team freeze focused lists. I would see this. Otherwise, I figure you're good running Umer Draw. There's no real problem in doing so. The level 2 I prefer is Umer Clear. It's free to grow. You can discard your hand and draw cards equal to the number of cards you discarded plus 1, and then your opponent does the same, except they draw equal to the cards they discarded minus 1. So when you play this, you're basically refreshing your hand with 1 extra card, and then your opponent does the same, except they get 1 less card. So it's basically a plus 2 card advantage in your favor because you're getting 1 extra, they're getting 1 less. It also does a lot to kind of mess up their hands if they've been holding onto servants. If they have some late game pieces, maybe they've been holding onto their level 3s before they can grow, then you can kind of mess up what their plans potentially could be. I think it's just very good overall to help control the flow of the game. She also has a second effect we haven't even talked about. It's pay 1 to freeze target Elrig on your opponent's field. This is potentially backbreaking. A lot right now of the Diva format teams are focused around getting effects off of their Elrig. A lot of the pieces actually specifically put attack trigger abilities on the Elrigs. So if you freeze your opponent's Elrig before they grow to level 3, you can kind of force them to hold off a turn on all of their special piece abilities that may cause all kinds of extra damage for you. So in addition to basically paying 1 to automatically save a damage or a servant, whatever you want to consider it as, you're also potentially holding off some extreme value plays at least a turn later, which can make a huge difference. It can really allow you to accelerate your game plan out and potentially land the finishing blow before your opponents can actually get their engine going. As I mentioned before, a lot of the Signy you use in your deck will depend on who your center is. There's not a whole lot of overlap. So the only one that I want to mention specifically here is Shub-Niggura, the Crimson Evil Queen. She has an auto ability whenever she attacks. If all the Signy on your field are red, you can pay red to vanish target Signy on your opponent's field with power 12k or less. This will hit just about anything for the most part. So paying 2 on attack phase timing to vanish a Signy is extremely powerful, regardless of what deck you're trying to use. It's a little harder to use because it requires all red, so obviously it's very good in Towel. Ad and Umer will have a harder time fitting this in to get it, specifically the vanish effect. She also has a second enter ability to pay 3 red to give herself double crush until end of turn. So if you don't have all red, or if you're in a situation where you can't get it, you can still pay 3 and give her double crush. That if you have an open lane, she can swing in and potentially get extra damage that way. So generally a very good card, pretty efficiently costed, does a lot of really nice things. If you can leverage her first ability, it's very powerful. Her second ability is okay for what it does. It's basically trying to get both of those out. Is kind of the trick with this. Again, Towel will like this the best, but you can use it in the other builds and it will still do a lot of work. The only other card that I would like to mention is the Ancient Surprise specific spell, Polygenesis. It is 1 green to cast. You can add a target green Signy from your ender zone in your hand, but if you have Ancient Surprise, which you will, you can instead add target Signy from your ender zone to your hand. I personally am a big fan in general of pulling Signy from the ender zone to hand. It's a really good recursion way of basically kind of bypassing the trash to pull it from the ender zone to the hand. It's also extremely good if you, for example, had a servant in your life cloth that is now kind of trapped in your enter zone. You can actually use Polygenesis to pull it back. It's pretty efficiently costed. Keep in mind that even though it does cost 1 enter, it kind of costs 2 because you are pulling a card out of your enter zone. So you actually will have 2 less enter. So that's something to keep in mind. But um, this, especially in decks, the green decks at centers that will charge a lot. You don't always control, if you're just enter charging from the top of the deck, you don't have a lot of control in that. So maybe when at comes in, you enter charge 3. One of them's the servant. You can use Polygenesis to pull that back in your hand if you need the guard, that kind of thing. So a lot of really interesting ways, I think, to use this card that I think will help make your game more consistent. That is Ancient Surprise in a nutshell. They will be getting some updates relatively soon. They'll have a full new set of centers and some assist options, as well as a new piece that will be coming out soon. So it may be worth it at that point to kind of revisit the team, just to kind of see what new options they have available. Unfortunately, that does coincide with a new team that will be coming out, Deus Ex Machina, which is kind of notorious for being a very powerful team at pretty much all stages of the game. So they do have to compete with that. But if you are an Ancient Surprise fan, if you like to use them, there are some interesting things that will be coming your way in the near future. So, as always, thanks for watching and take care.